Hi there. Welcome to the Self-Worth Renaissance podcast. This is your host, Kirsten Van Wingerden. I'm a licensed mental health counselor in Washington State. Please note that what is about to be discussed in this episode is not a replacement for individual therapy and is a collection of musings and thoughts on mental health topics. Welcome back to the Self-Worth Renaissance, the podcast where we rediscover our worth, embrace our imperfections, and step into the most empowered version of ourselves. I'm Kirsten Van Wingerden, your host and licensed mental health counselor, here to guide you through your journey towards self-love and confidence. Today, we're diving into a topic that affects many romantic, as well as platonic and familial relationships. The topic is codependence. And whether you've heard about codependence or not, I think that there is a lot that you could gain from this episode. I think it's something that is really rampant within our culture, what we see on TV, what looks healthy in relationships. So we're going to talk a lot about that. I'm going to explain what it is, how it shows up, and how to work with it, and how to heal from it. And so, I think codependence often starts with the best intentions. We really want to care for and support our partners, our loved ones, and it can really lead to unhealthy dynamics where either one or both partners lose their sense of self completely. So it's kind of like you sacrifice every part of who you are to really make that other person happy or make sure they're okay. And so in this episode, we'll explore what codependence looks like, how we can kind of name, I'm experiencing that or I'm not experiencing that, how it impacts our relationships, and then most importantly, how to break free from these patterns to build healthier, more balanced connections. So if you've ever felt like you're losing yourself in a relationship or that your self-worth is tied to your partner's happiness, this episode is for you. So let's unpack this together and see what comes up. So let's start by defining what codependence really is. So codependence at its core, it's an excessive emotional or psychological reliance on a partner. And it's often to the point where one person's sense of identity or self-worth is heavily tied to the relationship. So if the relationship is struggling, then that means there's something inherently wrong with that person who is codependent. They believe that, even if that is not true. There's great work done on this by Melody Beattie. I will link some of her books in the show notes as well. And there's tons of research, tons of writing, self-help on codependence. So I will just link so many things into this podcast episode. But, oftentimes codependence is actually a way to soothe our own anxiety by trying to control another person's behavior. And I'm going to slow that down and say it again because it's really important. Codependence is actually a way to soothe our own internal state or anxiety by controlling another person's behavior. And it's wrapped up in the idea that we know what is better for that person's own good, or that we know what will help them live a healthy and fulfilling life. And it puts us in this savior-victim complex as well, right? I know better for you. I know what you need. And it can be really uncomfortable to watch our loved ones really suffer or hurt themselves or cause problems in their lives. And so maybe we jump into that codependent role because, we see something obvious, right? For example, someone who has a problem with alcoholism, addiction, you might become codependent to that person to try to keep them alive. You might be always, counting their drinks, asking what's going on, looking for the empties around the house, finding them in hidden places. And it's this environment where the codependent person becomes so hyper vigilant to that other person's quote unquote failures that they completely lose themselves, right? They stop thinking about, okay, where is the line where I need to walk away and I need to take care of myself, and they focus completely on that other person's well-being in order to keep the relationship intact, even if that relationship is incredibly harmful to the person who's codependent. And we're going to get into why this happens and where it comes from later on. But if that hit for you at all, if you're like, man, been there, I just want to let you know you're not alone. There is incredible resources through organizations like Al-Anon that I will also link to kind of help people and folks that have found themselves in those positions. So, it can be something as heavy as that, and then it can be something as simple as like keeping your friend, I don't know, always like feeling responsible to make sure that they get up on time in the morning, right? Like that kind of thing. But, there's a spectrum to it. So I want to talk about like the common signs of codependence and what that can look like. So one of the common signs, and, just note to yourself as you're listening to this what feels true. So it's feeling responsible for your partner's emotions or problems, neglecting your own needs to prioritize your partner's. So, for example, you didn't eat to make sure that, they got this thing at work, right? Or whatever it is. Difficulty setting boundaries or saying no. There's a fear of being alone or abandoned at the root of it sometimes, which can cause us to stay in unhealthy relationships. Challenges with knowing what is the truth, i.e., what is okay versus unhealthy behavior. Sometimes codependent people have a past history of trauma, and they have a hard time differentiating what is okay treatment versus what isn't okay treatment. And so that's also something to note. I think, when we think about codependence, we can kind of think about a dynamic where one person is over-functioning and one person is under-functioning. And this can really lead to imbalance and resentment over time. Not only is like the codependent person really suffering, but the person who is the under performer, or the person who's not really pulling their weight, like they are suffering too, which I think is also important to note. So let's talk a little bit about how codependence affects romantic relationships. And in romantic relationships, codependence can kind of create a cycle of overgiving and under-receiving, where one partner consistently sacrifices their needs, they may feel unappreciated or exhausted, and the other person may become really overly reliant or even resentful of the partner that's over-functioning. And that dynamic can lead to these three things that really impact well-being. And I want to note that, I'm a psychotherapist, a licensed clinical mental health counselor, and oftentimes I get individuals that come into therapy and they are experiencing these three symptoms, but they don't have the language yet to understand what's happening or why. And we get to do this incredible but incredibly hard work of identifying what healthy relationships are, what that looks like, and what does it mean to reclaim my identity, and how do I stop living in these codependent patterns. And for the clients, it's really hard and kind of unnerving work because they are literally challenging the way that they've approached their entire life. And it's kind of like someone pulled the rug out from under you and said, hey, did you know you're not responsible for X, Y, and Z? And I just have so much gratitude and I think awe that people are willing to turn into themselves in that way and really face patterns that are hard and really face reality. I think that's one of the hardest things we'll do in our lifetime. So I just want to put that note out there that this is hard and heavy work. But let me tell you about some of the things that show up in therapy that I notice. So the number one thing I notice is a loss of individual identity. So oftentimes a codependent person will kind of mold themselves to their partner's preferences, hobbies, lifestyle, kind of losing sight of who they are. And I do want to note that I've also seen this in dynamics in families, not just in romantic relationships too. So in families where mom and daughter are super enmeshed, there's no individuation, identities that are separate. And so, people come into my office and say like they express like feeling like a shell of themselves and unsure of who they are after leaving a relationship that has strong elements of codependence or while they're still in it. And some folks actually, they might have known their identity before the relationship and then they lost it. Whereas some people really struggled with identity before and during the relationship and after, right? Because now they're in therapy. So there really is like no specific person that falls into codependent patterns. There are attributes that might make you more likely or experiences in life that might make you more likely to be codependent, but it can happen to the strongest person. That second thing I noticed too is emotional exhaustion. So constantly prioritizing your partner's well-being over your own can leave you feeling drained and unfulfilled. And I often hear people say that they feel really numb. And it's oftentimes that their own emotions are so repressed and hidden that like they're putting all this energy into, oh my gosh, I have to make sure this other person's okay and that, whatever it might be, that they're going to be fine. And then they're ignoring and self-abandoning every single emotion that's happening internally in their own experience. So not only are they exhausted about regulating this other person, making sure that other person's okay, but they're exhausted from repressing their own emotions and their own experience. And that is really tiring. People come in and just say like, I'm so tired and I don't know why. I don't know what's wrong with me. And I'll tell you, like, I am one of those people. Like, it's taken me a long time to figure out why I've been so tired for like most of my life. And I'm laughing because I've done the work and I'm getting closer to the other side. Obviously, the work is never done. But like, yeah, it makes sense. If you're constantly having to repress your own feelings and manage someone else's, you're going to be exhausted. And then that third point, there's unbalanced expectations. So over time, the codependent person may feel unacknowledged, and then the person who's under functioning might feel pressured to meet unrealistic standards of care, right? So like, oh gosh, let's see. Like the person that is overfunctioning cleans the entire house, makes it look perfect and beautiful, and then they get resentful because the other person doesn't have that same standard. And instead of having a conversation about it, maybe becomes this like tension, resentment that builds over time. And it just leads to situations that are really uncomfortable. And, understanding how these patterns play out is the first step to breaking free of them. So we're going to move on next to some of the root causes of codependence. So some of the reasons that we can have traits of codependence can come from a variety of factors. So it can come from early childhood experiences, such as growing up in environments where love and validation might have been conditional. It could have been something where you learn to prioritize other people's needs to earn love. And this pattern might carry into adult relationships. I also think, though, that codependence can kind of be linked to some patterns of Western culture and ways that women are seen in society, as well as religious backgrounds, encouragement of, submission within certain faith groups. And, I think that there has been some normalization that women are to overfunction for the opposite gender or for their partner. And, I think about on social media, you might see like, oh, the mental load that women carry. And it is true. Like, there is a lot that women are expected to maintain and contribute to a partnership where men, they do have expectations on them that are hard and stressful, and there's a lot of pressure too. But today I really want to focus on codependence. So I want to always remind you too that I might sound like sometimes I'm talking in black and white, but if you have a very personal conversation with me, I know that there is a lot more gray. But to get my point across today, I'm going to talk in some absolutes today. So one of the reasons that you might become codependent would be because of low self-worth. And that could come from believing that your value comes from taking care of other people and making sure that everyone else is okay. And if someone else isn't okay, then you did something wrong. And I immediately think about like children playing therapist for their parents. So if you were a child of divorce and you were the person that was in between your parents, and your parents were complaining about the other parent to you, and you were stuck in the center, or maybe your parents weren't divorced and you were getting that too, you learned how to sacrifice your own needs in those situations. So, kids, when they hear that something is wrong with mom from dad, or vice versa, something's wrong with dad from mom, they begin to internalize that there's a part of them that is broken and messed up, just like dad or just like mom is. And that really becomes internalized because they can't really differentiate that there are lots of reasons why mom and dad act or behave in a certain way. So, that can come from a really early age if you come from a home where there wasn't, that typical family system. And it happens too within family systems that are still intact, and maybe the trauma was hidden really well. So, yeah, low self-worth is a huge contributor to codependence because you're just going to always seek happiness from that other person. And then there is fear of abandonment, which can lead us to stay in unhealthy relationships out of fear of being alone, because the codependent person really struggles to self-soothe their internal state on their own. Being single can be really scary for the codependent person. And yeah, yikes, right? Like, how scary is it to have to regulate your own emotion and feel the thing that's really hard and turn into that experience that is so unfathomable and uncomfortable because you've spent so much time taking care of everyone else's needs except your own. So how are you supposed to do that for yourself, right? Like, it's just terrifying. So you'll make every excuse in the book. You'll do everything possible to keep that person close to you, even if they're harming you. Instead of knowing like, okay, this is my line, this is my boundary, this is when I walk away. And then, there's unresolved childhood wounds that come up, right? So repeating patterns learned in childhood, such as seeking approval or avoiding conflict. If conflict was really big and explosive, or maybe conflict was the silent treatment, you never learned how to have any type of reconciliation, then conflict is really scary. And you might do everything within your power to avoid any type of conflict if possible. And you might seek approval in other people to believe that there's something okay with you. There is some truth to we pick partners that continue childhood wounding if we do not do our self-work first. And you know what? You can't do your self-work if you're unwilling to be single or be with a partner that's willing to work with you, right? So just keep that in mind. Another topic is that media really portrays unhealthy and unrealistic dynamics in relationships with women. I do love me a good rom-com. I love, romantic movies. I'm a huge fan. My favorite one is 2 Weeks Notice. Give me anything with Hugh Grant. I'm happy. Early 2000s, it's the best. But oftentimes there's this dynamic that's portrayed of one person giving up everything to be with that other person. And that just isn't realistic. That just, that can cause a lot of problems in a relational dynamic. And, there's also expectations on women to be docile and submissive in some cultures. So, just shut up and do the work, right? Don't complain. Men have it so much harder. Just get over it. And that can also kind of cause some codependent patterns. So recognizing that these root causes happen and where they come from might help you understand why you gravitate towards some of those dynamics. So, how do we break free and undo these patterns of codependence? It's a great question, and it's hard work. And I'm going to give you some ideas of where you can start. And I wouldn't tell you that you can do this work if it wasn't something that I've actively done and I'm actively working upon in my own life. I think if you grew up in systems where codependence was normal, it might be some of your life work to create healthier patterns in your relationships and your dynamics. And it doesn't mean that there's something wrong with you or that there's something broken about you if you have codependent patterns and styles. It just means that you need to find people that understand that and are willing to do the work with you. And if someone shames you for that or makes you feel less than for that, those aren't your people. I'm just going to say that. So let's talk about how we can kind of break free of some codependence and create healthy relationships. So, the first thing that I really encourage is to start to activate some self-awareness. So I want you to go through your past relationships, even friendships, family dynamics, where you might have overfunctioned for other people. And I want you to reflect on how your actions and thoughts might be tied to a desire for approval or for a fear of abandonment. I just want you to go through without judgment either, just to note where along the line maybe you got caught up in a certain way of being and behaving. And to see too, maybe in some circumstances, you did have to do that. Maybe growing up, you actually had to be that caretaker for a parent because if you weren't, it wasn't going to be okay, right? And I also just want to remind you too, when a family decides to have children, the children are now the center of that family system and healthy family systems. When one of the parents is now the center of the family system, we are going into unhealthy territory, right? So reflect on that, right? Just note that and create some self-awareness about okay, when recently have I stepped into a messy situation that I should have just said no to? Hey, we've all been there. It happens. The second thing I want you to do is set some healthy boundaries. So learn how to say no and prioritize your own needs. I'm thinking about something recently in my own life where I just totally overextended myself and I was starting to get migraines like pretty frequently. And I thought I had kicked them for a bit. And then I realized I wasn't eating breakfast. I was just like chowing down a protein bar and thinking that counted. And that's not healthy. So I had to really look at that and prioritize, okay, I need to prioritize my sleep better so that I can get up earlier, get my movement in, and then I can have a full and, nutritious and good breakfast. So I had to like really look at that pattern. And ever since I started prioritizing that one little part of my day, I stopped getting migraines. So, it doesn't have to be a huge thing for you to kind of start to navigate and identify what you need to shift in your life. And I want to say boundaries are not about shutting people out. Remember that. Like, boundaries are building bridges, not barriers. Boundaries are put in place so that we can continue to have relationship with those people and with ourselves, to be honest, right? Number 3, develop self-worth. So focus on activities and practices that build your self-esteem. Remember that your worth is not tied to how much you give to other people, and your self-worth comes from within. So go try some new hobbies, go do something silly, make a mistake, embarrass yourself, like do it all, and, go meet new people. Go develop yourself, right? Like when you're in relationship with other people, you can really get to know different parts of yourself. So go explore that. And number 4, go seek support. So consider some therapy if that's affordable for you. I think therapy is a really great way to really dial in and look at those codependent patterns and how we can break free of them and create safety in self. And maybe talk to a friend or even a mentor that has really valuable insight into that and what it means to be, a healthy, independent, self-encouraged person. And my last thing to say is just practice some self-care. Make time for yourself and prioritize your emotional, physical, and mental health, right? Kind of like talking about those boundaries, eat your breakfast. Self-care really helps reinforce the idea that you are worthy of love and attention, and it's independent of your relationships. So, that self-care is kind of like putting your words into action. And as we say, like, watch other people's behaviors to know their character. Watch your behavior towards yourself to know how much you love yourself. So as you're developing this ability to kind of break free from your codependent patterns, let's kind of look at like, how do we foster relationships based on mutual respect and support, and what does that look like? So here's what a healthier relationship can look like where codependence isn't running the show. It looks like mutual respect. So you have boundaries, your partner has boundaries, and you each have individual needs that it's okay for you to meet. There's balanced giving and receiving. There's an equal exchange of support and care. Now, I do want to note, it can't always be 50-50. Sometimes we are giving 80 and our partner is giving 20, but that shouldn't be all the time. Sometimes there are seasons where a partner is going through something really, really hard, and we do have to support them and be there for them. And we would expect the same in reverse towards ourselves. But overall, there should be mutual sharing and understanding of investing into the relationship and putting the relationship as the important character, I guess you could say, in the relationship. So that's important. You should also have independence and togetherness. So you can have your own identity, your own interests and friendships outside the relationship. Really foster your community outside of the relationship and have people that you trust and you can rely on. And that will really help create that sense of self, especially when like you come back to your partner and you have so much to share with them, right? Like you're like, I can tell you about my day because like there were good things happening and look at what I'm doing and achieving on my own, right? It's that person you come home to and you get to share like, hey, this is what's working, this is what isn't working, and there's no judgment. And there also needs to be open communication. So both of you need to be able to express your feelings and needs without fear of rejection or judgment. You should be able to say, hey, I need X, Y, and Z from you. And they should be able to say, yes, I got you. Or I can give you X and Y. Maybe Z is a little too much, right? But you get to have those open conversations and figure out how are we going to grow together. So those are some hallmarks of a really healthy relationship that's functioning well. So, some final thoughts. I think codependence is really a hard thing to work through. So if you're like, oh my gosh, I feel overwhelmed, it's okay. You're not alone. Take baby steps, take small steps each day to create a life that feels more fulfilling for yourself, that aligns with your values. And you'll start to see as you do that, the codependence becomes less and less desirable over time. And, I think that this goal of creating a healthy sense of self and independence is not unachievable to attain. You can completely achieve it. And I want you to remember that your worth is not measured by how much you give to other people, but by how much you honor your own needs and your own boundaries. So, thank you for joining me today on Self-Worth Renaissance. If you found this episode helpful, share it with someone who might benefit from it. Leave a review, download these episodes, like them, share them with people, post them on social media. Your feedback really helps this podcast grow, and then I can create more and more content. And it's just been such a joy to continue to develop this. So until next time, take care of yourself, and remember, you are worthy just as you are.